everyone. Today we are in the second week of our 4-week series on other religions. To introduce our series last week, we discussed that it's not actually helpful to pretend that all religions are the same. There are similarities, but there are some profound differences. And in order to best love our neighbors, we must understand and embrace those differences rather than pretending we are the same. In addition, in order to better own our own faith, we need to understand why we chose it rather than others. Last week's religions of focus were Hinduism, Buddhism, and Chinese folk religion. And we talked about one major difference in those religions to Christianity is that God acts first, breaking down barriers and seeking us out rather than the other way around. So let's move on to this week. This week we are talking about Judaism and Islam. Judaism and Islam are monotheistic, meaning one God, which makes them different from the three we talked about last week. They also have the same origin story, which coincidentally is also the same origin story as Christianity. They are considered Abrahamic, meaning good old Father Abraham starts off all three. Judaism is the 10th largest religion in the world, meaning it's smaller than last week's religion, but it's important for us to talk about them because they have a much greater cultural impact on us, and not to mention that the fact that Jesus, our founder, was Jewish. So Judaism was unique because it was the world's first monotheistic religion, which was a big deal when it started in 2000 BC. Their main sacred text is the Hebrew Bible, which you all would know as the Old Testament. Defining belief of Judaism is that Jews are God's chosen people, and their call is to read, interpret, and follow the Hebrew law, or the Torah. This includes observing quite a few holidays and fasting periods, as well as observing the Sabbath. Similar to us, Sabbath is a day of rest, but they are much more intentional about it, and they have some specific rules they follow, such as not requiring others to work either. They are largely unconcerned with life after death and simply place their focus on following the law in this life. So that's all I'm going to cover on Judaism, but like I mentioned last week, this is nowhere close to a comprehensive understanding. I hope the overview intrigues you to go and learn some more information and at least gives you a baseline to start with should you have a friend or neighbor who practices Judaism. All right, so Islam. Islam is the second largest religion in the world behind Christianity. It was founded by Muhammad in the 7th century AD, making it the youngest world religion. And the word Islam can be translated directly to mean submission to the will of God. They recognize the Old Testament prophets, acknowledge Jesus as a prophet, but they exalt Muhammad as the most important and the last prophet. They aim to live a life in complete submission to Allah, which is simply the Arabic word for God. They are similar to Christians in that they believe in a day of judgment and life after death. Their main religious text is known as the Quran, and they follow 5 pillars of Islam: prayer of confession and submission, praying 5 times a day, giving to those in need, fasting during Ramadan, and a once-in-a-lifetime pilgrimage or journey to Mecca, the city where Muhammad was born. All right, so there you have it, a down and dirty overview of Judaism and Islam. Again, we could go many directions on what piece of theology to focus on that sets Christianity apart, but I think the most significant difference is our approach to the law. Both Judaism and Islam focus very heavily on knowing the rules and following the rules. In Islam, how well you follow the rules determines your place in the afterlife. Christianity, again, turns this concept on its head. Romans 3:21 through 24 reads, "But now God's righteousness has been revealed apart from the law, which is confirmed by the law and the prophets. There is no distinction between Jew and Gentile. All have sinned and fall short of God's glory, but all are treated as righteous freely by his grace because of ransom that was paid by Christ Jesus." Okay, so it's important to note there that it said there's no difference between Jew and Gentile. Gentile simply means non-Jew, and the original readers of this passage would have understood that to mean those people who don't follow the law. Then Paul, the writer of Romans, is making a huge statement saying that there's no difference between those who follow the law and those who don't. And instead, righteousness is given through faith in Jesus Christ. That's a big deal. No amount of law following makes us righteous. Jesus and Jesus alone makes us righteous. So hopefully you all can see that this is a pretty substantial difference, and I, for one, am super grateful for it. I bet a lot of you can relate in that sometimes it feels like we have to earn our salvation. Or at the very least, it feels like God maybe loves us a little bit more when we follow the law. Side note, when I mention the law, both the Jewish and Muslim laws have the same underlying intent. They both boil down to strategies on how to truly love God and our neighbors. They aren't random, and the intention behind them isn't cruel. They get a little tricky for us in 2022, and that society has changed a lot since they were written, making it so that when we can read them and then we can lose the context. For example, the Old Testament, aka the Jewish Bible, and the Quran tells us appropriate justice is eye for an eye, meaning that if you do something bad, then that same bad thing is done to you. Enforcing that nowadays would often be considered cruel and unusual punishment, such as and something that most countries ban. But when that law was written, people were enacting much crueler punishments, such as killing someone if they stole an apple from you. This law was a large step towards justice, an act of love, even for those who cause us harm. So these laws, both Jewish and Islamic, when understood in context, really are great guiding principles. So much so that Paul later on tells us we need to follow them too. But the difference is we do this in response to Jesus. Sound familiar from last week? We don't follow the laws to make ourselves righteous. This is, in fact, impossible. We are made righteous through faith in Jesus. And in response to that amazing gift, we then follow the laws and love our neighbors. If you've never read the Torah or the Quran, you might think that following the law is easy. If it boils down to loving others, we can handle that, right? So just don't be a jerk. I think I can do that. Actually, not being a jerk is just the starting point. Loving your neighbor truly and fully loving them, all of them, is quite the ask. That means in every moment putting the needs of others above your own. That means sacrificing your happiness for the sake of others, always. That means being conscious of every single thing you do and choosing not to cause harm. Yeah, that's, no one's even close. We're not close. Someday, after Jesus returns and a new heaven and earth are established, that will be our default state. We will all perfectly love each other, and because we are being perfectly loved by others in return, we'll all have everything we could ever want or need. And it will be glorious. We are so far away from that right now, so I am incredibly thankful for Jesus. Jesus made me righteous by his sacrifice on the cross. I do my best to love in return, and then I see how much I fall short, see my sin on full display, and then I'm reminded again that it's okay, that all have sinned and fallen short, and I don't have to stress because I am made righteous in Jesus Christ. So I hope this has been helpful. I hope you learned a little something, and I hope you all have a fabulous and life-giving discussion in your small groups. Bye, everyone.